Good evening. Good evening. Good evening. We'll go ahead and get started here. So I'm Matt David with the city's Planning and Zoning Department. Thanks for coming out. It's part of the Imagine Austin speaker series. This is something we do a few times a year to help spread the word about Imagine Austin and help implement our comprehensive plan. What are the 5 steps of implementation, community engagement, and ongoing education. This event is hosted by the Planning and Zoning Department as well as the Congress of Urbanism Central Texas chapter. Much like the Imagine Austin Comprehensive Plan, it's too much for the city to do on its own. We need help to implement it. So I want to really thank CNU Central Texas chapter for partnering up with us to make this event happen. So our speaker, Dr. Antwi Akom, a few of us got to hear him speak earlier this year at the CNU National Conference. And after that, we're like, okay, we got to get this guy down here to Austin. He's an international recognized expert on the green economy, racial inequality, climate justice, participatory technology and GIS mapping, community-based participation, and sustainable development. He's associate professor at San Francisco State University and co-founder of the Institute for Sustainable Economic, Educational, and Environmental Design, ISEED. So how it's going to work is Dr. Akom's going to speak for about 45 minutes to an hour, and then we'll have some Q&A after that. You can write your questions down on the note cards and hand them out the aisle, or we'll have a couple of mics and people can just raise your hand and ask questions. So with that, Dr. Antwi Akom.
Great. Hey, everybody. So exciting to be here. Thank you for having me. Really grateful. Thank you, Imagine Austin. Thank you, CNU. So if anyone wants to tweet this, I just want to get that sort of stuff out of the way. You can Twitter yourselves, do whatever you need to do. At Antwi Akom, at _ISEED, and at _Streetwise, STRTWYZE. I really come today to talk to you all about Eco Apartheid and what it really means to give voice to the voiceless. And some of this will be somewhat repetitive from my earlier talk today in the afternoon, but a lot of it won't be. And I want to start off by talking about what do I mean by giving voice to the voiceless and my own self-presentation. Most of my life I have felt like one of those people who didn't really have a voice, right? And I'm paraphrasing James Baldwin, but he basically talks about if you don't know where you came from, you don't know where you're going, right? And my own self-presentation, and I dressed up for you all today. I put on a new shirt. I got my boots on, right? I'm looking really spiffy for you all. Much of this is about staying really grounded and remembering where I come from, right? And I really think that that's something that's important. And I know that Frances Cress Welsing, who is the second person, talks about if you don't understand racism, then everything else will confuse you, right? And that too has really impacted my own experiences because so many experiences, as I'm going to share with you all this evening, have been impacted by structural racism, both in the United States and abroad. And the third real quote that has inspired me that I want to share with you is, of course, from Dr. Seuss, right? And that is, be who you are and say what you feel because those who mind don't matter and those who matter don't mind. And so for me, creating and being myself and dressing the way that I do, regardless of whether I'm at the White House or here with all of you, remembering that I am just a basic everyday person, connected to other people and here to serve the people, I hope that that creates the space for you to be yourself, however you choose to be. And in that way, we're building community with one another. So I want to start off this conversation with you all this evening. This is a picture of my mom. I grew up in a single-parent, female-headed household. headed by the most loving, the most nurturing, the most compassionate woman in the world. But we were poor, and we got poor when my mom got sick. She got lupus, and she was forced to retire early. And the only way that we were able to struggle and survive, the only way that we were able to make ends meet, was to get connected to food and finances and houses and cars through friends, family, connections, and social networks. And I want to be really clear what I'm saying. I'm saying that black people, poor people, and people of color around the world, we invented the sharing economy, right? However, I'll say it again just because that sounded so right on. Right? I think y'all are supposed to clap on that one. I think, right? Black people, poor people, let's try it again. Black people, poor people, and people of color, right? Around the world, we invented the sharing economy. That's true. Right? But when the sharing economy gets commercialized, when the sharing economy gets commodified, when the sharing economy gets corporatized, it always rolls out the same way. That is, where the ghetto, where the barrio, where the favela, where the res begins is where bike share and car share and greenways and green paths end, right? And I really want us all this evening to think critically about that. I want us to think about, what do we want our communities to look like, not just in 100 years, not just in 50 years, not just in 10 years, 5 years, tomorrow, right? What do we want our neighborhoods and our communities to look like tomorrow? Do we want our communities and neighborhoods to work for rich people or poor people, for people of color or white folks, for eco-haves or eco-have-nots? And who will have a say in and a voice in how we will design our communities of tomorrow? Will it be powerful elites as sort of business as usual right now, or will it be everyday people? And the two most pressing issues of our lifetime, in my view, are climate change and racial, gender, class, and other forms of socioeconomic inequality. And a case in point is gentrification happening right here in Austin. Right? We know Austin is one of the most segregated cities in the United States. We know that Austin is one of the fastest growing cities in the United States. We know Austin has some of the worst traffic in the United States. We experienced that just trying to get here tonight, this evening. It's like, am I going to make it on time? Right? We know that Austin has one of the most racist histories of land use policy in the United States, and I'm talking about the 1928 plan. And we know that Austin is rapidly becoming one of the most gentrified communities in the United States. And so what we've gotten really good at here in Austin is we've gotten good at building places that not just poor people cannot afford. We've gotten good at building places that our librarians cannot afford, our teachers cannot afford, our firefighters cannot afford, right? Our designers, our architects, our planners, our community-based leaders, our activists, and everyday people like me and you. And our excuse, and this is for some of us in this room, and even I too am guilty, is, well, I got in early, right? Have you ever heard that? I got in early, so it's all good. I'm in, you're out, I'm in, I got in early, right? But what does that say about our children? Or what does that say about the next generation of librarians, of teachers, of firefighters, of designers, of architects, of planners, of community activists, and everyday people? Where are they going to live? And how are they going to survive? And this, by itself, should concern every single person in this room. But another major concern should be income inequality and the racialization of income inequality. We are living in a country where, over the last several years, income inequality for the top 5% has grown exponentially, actually, but dropped for the bottom 20 to 30% and stayed stagnant for those of us in the missing middle, right? And when we racialize this, what we see is that blacks and Latinos who are doing the exact same job as white folks earn $9 an hour less than white people. Now, what is that doing to our bodies, right? Why do we think that black and brown youth are dying of unnatural causes? And the medical research is absolutely clear. Two things are happening. On the left-hand side, what we see is the social science research talks about microaggressions and implicit bias, right? These are the unconscious stereotypes that are thrown at people of color and women that keep beating us up. And they don't hit us in the face, right? They're body blows, body blow, body blow, body blow, right? Over and over and over, right? Until they accumulate and we... And at the same time, the medical research talks about weathering. And weathering is the negative physiological impacts of living in a race-conscious society. And what you see on this left-hand side is what a healthy vein looks like. And what you see on the other side is what an unhealthy vein looks like when you're all stressed out and full of cortisol, right? And isn't it surprising, I just took these off the internet, that the one with cortisol looks like a picture of Little Africa? Right, it does, right? And that's exactly the kinds of populations that are most effective. So what did anyone do wrong to have to experience the levels of economic injustice, health injustice, food injustice, transportation injustice, housing injustice, education injustice, and the like? And of course, the answer is nothing, right? Except many of us were born in the wrong zip code. Okay? So there are 3.9 million children who grow up in neighborhoods of concentrated poverty. That's 2.5 times the size of Manhattan. There are 30 million children worldwide in developed countries that grow up in neighborhoods of concentrated poverty. Now let me be clear what I'm saying. I'm saying that no matter how hard these young people work in school, no matter how hard their parents work to get ahead, the single greatest determinant of their life chances, of their command over resources, of their health and well-being is the zip code that they grow up in. Now, this is a crisis. It is a moral crisis that should piss everybody off in this room, because nobody should be able to tell you before the school year even starts who's going to fail, who's going to succeed, who's going to live, who's going to die based on their zip code. But it's a financial crisis because the black and Latino folks and other people of color who are earning that $9 an hour less for doing the same job, if we would equalize those financial gaps, there would be $110 billion more circulating in the economy. Right? That is serious money that could be priming our economy. So if we want to create complete communities and stop creating communities that work for the 1%, but begin to create complete communities for the 100%, it's not enough to be asking questions about how can we build healthier cities? How can we build happier cities? How can we build greener cities? Without first really addressing the real structural inequality that has made our racial structural inequality that has shaped our cities past, present, and future. And so the challenge of the 21st century then is how do we reimagine and redefine our cities for communities that have been locked out of sustainability conversations, locked out of social justice conversations, locked out of smart cities conversations, right? Locked out of shareable cities conversations. How do we redesign our cities, not for, but with communities that are experiencing unimaginable forms of trauma, limited access to food, and unprecedented environmental threats? We know with just a 1 degree increase in Celsius, we've seen what has happened with Hurricane Katrina, Superstorm Sandy, Hurricane Patricia. We've seen the floods in Pakistan. We know the kinds of droughts in Russia that displaced 20 million people and showed us the highest spikes in food prices that the world has yet to be seen. What would happen if we had an increase in 5 to 6 degrees Celsius? What would happen to our Earth then? The world is not an open sewer, but we treat it that way. And so, to me, we have two climate crises happening at the same time, both with devastating consequences for the future of the planet. We have the collapse of our green infrastructure and our ecological systems, and we have the collapse of our civic infrastructure, and specifically our educational systems. But there's not enough conversation about the relationship between the two. There's not enough conversation about how the environment impacts our schools and our school children. But we've got lead in the paint. We've got arsenic in the water. We've got PCBs in the windows. We've got asbestos in the ceilings and the floors. We're at such a point where the building stock in urban and rural America is so dilapidated and so dysfunctional that it's creating what I call toxic toddlers. We're at a point where the very food that we feed our school children is what Jonathan Kozol refers to as creating death at an early age. And I would subscribe is much responsible for the obesity epidemic that we're facing in this country. And so all of this I refer to as Eco Apartheid, because it's not just happening in our schools, it's happening in our communities, and there are racial, gender, and socioeconomic dimensions. So what is Eco Apartheid? That's the second big take-home I'd like for all of you tonight. So Eco Apartheid is a systems theory that examines the ecological impacts of structural racialization. It highlights the ways that structures and institutions cumulatively cause unequal environmental health benefits and burdens based on race, class, gender, language, immigration status, as well as their interconnections. Now, what do I mean by cumulative causation? Let's take an example right here in East Austin. So go into your eco-imagination, and all of you all are black and brown children, dark-skinned, let's be dark-skinned black and brown children, all right, growing up here in East Austin, okay? So it feels good. Get a little chocolate going for yourselves, right? Loosening up, feeling good. All right, so how many grocery stores are in our neighborhood, black and brown children in East Austin? None? There's a few, but they're not very good, right? So depending on how we draw the boundaries of East Austin, there might be 1 to 3, right, grocery stores in our neighborhood, right? Now, how many liquor stores are there in our neighborhood? This is black church style. So that's call and response. How many liquor stores are there in our neighborhood? We all live here. A lot. Give me numbers, just for the fun of it. Right, all right. So depending on how, thank you, depending on how you draw the boundaries of our community, there could be anywhere between 40 and 60 liquor stores, depending on what the boundaries are around East Austin, right? So when we're on our way to school, we're hungry, we're going to stop and eat. Where are we most likely going to stop and eat? The liquor store. Thank you. That was an easy one. And what kind of food are we going to eat? Chips. Processed, Takis, Cheetos, donuts, anything else? M&Ms, chicharrones, thank you. What are the red vines, right? All the stuff we eat now, some of us, right? And so we're gonna stop at the liquor store and we're gonna load up on all that kind of food, right? And we're still on our way to school. Remember, we're talking about Eco Apartheid. We're talking about cumulative causation, right? We're putting that theory into practice, right, to make it come alive. So it's not just some term like, well, he talked about Eco Apartheid and I feel smart. No. We want to live it, right? And so we're on our way to school, and black and brown children, what is the predominant race and gender of the teachers teaching in urban schools today? White females. That's right. Now, this is not to say that white women cannot teach us black and brown children, because white women can absolutely teach black and brown children, right? We know teaching is about preparation. We know teaching is about duty. We know teaching is about compassion and love and caring, right? So white women can absolutely teach us. But we also want to note they don't look like us, right? They haven't shared our same experiences. And so when we finally get to school and we walk into school and we're all sugared up, what is the general diagnosis for us black and brown youth? ADHD, right? So you said it, I didn't even have to. That's eco-apartheid, right? That's cumulative causation, right? In an eco-apartheid analysis, the outcomes matter more than the intent. No one meant to harm us black and brown youth, right? What happened was, due to the structural boundaries of our neighborhood, due to what is offered to us because of our zip code, we get this diagnosis that essentially screws us for our whole life in a multiplicity of ways, right? Labels us in really negative ways. And why is this important? The significance of redefining eco-apartheid is threefold. One, eco-apartheid suggests that environmental bads are in low-income communities and communities of color, while environmental goods are in wealthier neighborhoods like open space and parks. Is this true for Austin? Absolutely, this is true. Second, eco-apartheid is a more powerful definition than environmental racism, precisely because it captures inequalities beyond race. I'm talking space, place, and waste. Here we're talking about the urban grocery gap, the fresh produce gap, the transportation gap, the walkability gap, while simultaneously centering race and racism. Third, eco-apartheid captures the racial reproduction of inequality. And here I'm talking about the United States has systematically institutionalized racial privilege for white people and white-looking people. Okay? The history of the United States is the history of systematically institutionalizing racial privilege for white people and white-looking people. And I always say both, because when you just say white people start slumping in their chairs and feeling all guilty, and it's all bad, right? This is not just about white people, right? What it is to say is airing people of color's dirty laundry that many of us tried to pass, right? i.e. pass for white if we could, not because we didn't love our cultural history, not because we didn't love our cultural identity, but because we wanted access to scarce institutional resources and privileges, right? Now, these are really important conversations. Right. We do not talk about race and structural racialization enough in our country. We do not talk about the roles that race has played in shaping our cities and our schools and our access to institutional resources and privileges. I don't know if we're going to have this same conversation again, we might have 5 to 7 of these in a lifetime that are not in a safe environment, that make us think and reflect critically. I find this kind of work as important as being a doctor, right? Or any other kind of surgeon, to sit here and be having this real conversation with all of you about the ways that race has shaped us and impacts our daily lives on an individual level, on an institutional level, and on an interpersonal level. And an internalized level. And so the history of America is the history of systematic, institutionalized racial privilege, whether we are talking about the Naturalization Law of 1790, the first law passed after the Constitution was ratified, which said whites and whites only could be free citizens of the United States. Or whether we're talking about the Homestead Act of 1862, which guaranteed white folks 160 acres of land for $10, where black people and other people of color, we couldn't even get 40 acres and a mule. Or whether we're talking about federally subsidized, federally underwritten, federally guaranteed FHA and VHA loans. On the backs of those loans was the creation of the white middle class, where if we would have done the same thing for people of color, we call it welfare. But when you do it for white folks, you know what you call it? Good, sound economic policy, right? And because of this systematic, institutionalized racial privilege, the average white family has 20 times the net worth of the average black family. Okay? 18 times the net worth of the average Latino family. This is key. Not solely because of hard work, not solely because of better morals, not solely because of better values, not solely because folks are more qualified, right? Rather, because of systematic, institutionalized racial privilege passed from one generation to the next. Now, this is within living memory. My own grandmother migrated from Louisiana out to liberal Portland, Oregon, with my grandfather, who worked on the trains, right, as a car porter. And when they got out to Portland, they had saved up a bunch of money. And were they able to buy a house? Hell no. Right? Why? Because my grandmother was discriminated against in terms of double jeopardy. It was both racial discrimination and gender. Right? Now, I think the good part of that story is a well-meaning white person helped them buy a home. And it's a story about how we can all work together. Right? But at the same time, when I hear conversations about affirmative action, right, and getting rid of affirmative action, and I'm not for affirmative action, this is all about meritocracy. Things are equal, right? I always sit there and think, let's switch. Okay? Let's just switch, right? I'll take the 160 acres. I'll take the federally subsidized FHA and VHA loans, right? I'll take all that, and you take, what are we talking, 20 years, maybe 40 years, where you get into a school that you were qualified to get into anyway. I'll take all the other stuff, all the other affirmative action, right, that we didn't call affirmative action, right? We call it colonization and conquest. Right? I'll take all of those resources, you take mine, let's see, ready, go. Right? Let's see who gets ahead. Right? And I think what happens is, my point to all of you, is that affirmative action conversations are ahistorical. Right? Oftentimes. They're not historicized in a way where they're really capturing the ways that inequalities have rolled out across our country. And the only way that our country is going to heal, the only way that our communities are going to come together, is when we are real with each other about our history, when we embrace all of our history, both the good and the bad, and we start to show compassion and caring for each other in different ways, and we understand that policy is really important in transforming these things. You can change light bulbs, which is changing our cultural behaviors, but you also need to change the laws. You need both at the same time. So we have not correctly identified the problem. We do not have an achievement gap. Okay? An achievement gap implies inequalities based on cultural or genetic difference. What we have is an opportunity gap. Okay? An opportunity gap remaps inequalities onto existing structural conditions. Now, how do I know this to be true, that we have an opportunity gap? Because the United States has 5% of the world's population, but we house 20% of the world's prisoners. Okay? 1 out of every 4 people locked up anywhere in the world is locked up in a United States jail or prison. Okay? And most of those folks are poor, Black, and Latino. And what about those folks who do get in? Right? What about those folks who have an undergraduate degree in economics and political science from UC Berkeley, a master's degree from Stanford University, and an Ivy League PhD? What happens to those folks? Are they successful? Who's this? That is me. Do I look happy? I am not happy. I am pissed off, right? I'm pissed off for several different reasons, but mostly I'm pissed off because I was unjustly incarcerated and my civil rights were violated, right? And anyone who does a cursory Google search of me will see that before the Black Lives Matter movement, I was the poster boy, right, for the professor who had been unjustly incarcerated. So it's 3:47 in the morning on October 26th. I had actually left my house. I live in Berkeley, teach at San Francisco State. At the time, I was a single father with 2 children, 5 and 7 years old. And I drove to my campus across the Bay Bridge because I wanted to get some books and be super prepared for my students who I love. And when I get to the campus, on my way over, it's about a 30-minute drive at that hour, my children both fell asleep. And so I was in this situation where, for the first time, my kids had fallen asleep. I didn't really want to wake them up. It was hard to get them to sleep. So I was like, you know what? I'm going to park literally right outside this window. I'm going to run in the building. I'm going to get my books, and I'm going to run out. Okay? I'd never left my kids before. So I was like, okay, I'm going to do it. Lock the door. Run into the building. There's a security guard there, like right by this young man. Zip by him, run up the stairs, one flight, get to my office, open the door, grab my books, come out, starting like this, come down, there's a cop walking towards me, right? A 22-year-old white male, right? And he says, put your hands behind your back, right? And I sort of looked like many of you are looking like. And then I said what many of you must be thinking, which is the big question. Why? Right? And he said, put your hands behind your back, or I'm going to make you put your hands behind your back. Now, the door to my office that says Dr. Akom is literally right here. This person has not asked me for my ID, nothing. Right? The next moment, the young man knocks all of the books out of my hand to the floor, drops down to his knees, and starts trying to tackle me down. Now, I'm like teeter-totting on him like this, okay? And I'm not a small person, you may have noticed, right? So I'm like, what are you doing? Stop. And he keeps going. And then I look down the hall, and about from here to the windows, or maybe a little further, there's another set of people, and I looked at them and I said, help, right? This young man calls for backup. So 2 black police officers come running up the stairs, and they take out their mace. And I'm like, oh, whoa, what's going on? You know, relax, everybody, right? And I'm like, look, I need to get to my children. My children in the car, I gotta go. They're like, oh, well, we just want to talk to you. We've got to talk to you. I said, talk to me. They're like, okay. And I'm fast forwarding the story for time, right? But they're like, okay, we will talk to you. We just want to handcuff you first. So they said, we're just going to handcuff you. We're going to take you downstairs. We're going to ask you a few questions. And then we'll let you go. I said, do what you got to do. So they handcuffed me. So we head downstairs. I get downstairs. They shove me in the back of the police car. Right? And they say, we're going to give you one phone call. And if that person doesn't pick up, we're going to take your children away to Child and Protective Services. Yeah, we're talking outrageous. And I need you all to go back in your eco-imaginations with me, because at that moment, I started to feel feelings that I've never felt before, and I don't think I've felt them in quite the same way since, right? And I want you in your eco-imagination to really think about what it was like to be a slave. What would it be like to have your mama sold? Your brother, your sister, your son, your daughter, while you're shackled and couldn't do anything about it. I'm talking about a million different kinds of feelings. Feel it. It's crazy making. It's crazy making feeling, right? That's what I was feeling, right? And luckily, my friend ended up answering the phone, and he came and he picked up my daughters, and they drove me off to jail. And while I'm in jail for a couple days, right, I realize there are so many people locked up who have no business being locked up. There is genius in jail. Brilliant people in there for really petty crimes. Do not get me wrong. There are plenty of people locked up that we are happy that are locked up. Right? Let's not romanticize it like everybody in there was so cool and it was great. I'm moving into jail tomorrow. That's not what I'm saying. Right? But what I am saying is it's a big money business. There's a lot of people in there for parking tickets, broken lights, traffic stops, like just stuff where it's like you're in jail, like, right? You're in jail? How long you been in here? You know, with really brilliant ideas. And out of this particular experience, I had a bunch of different things happen, and this goes to the kinds of privilege that we all have, because I think we think about race privilege, but I might be underprivileged in race, but there's multiple layers of privilege. I'm privileged as a male. Right? I'm privileged as a person who has a PhD. And I think it's really easy to lose sight of those kinds of areas where we have privilege, and everyone should be thinking about where we are privileged and being prepared to be humble and give up our privilege to empower someone else. That's part of giving voice to the voiceless. And what happened for me was a really well-meaning white lawyer by the name of John Kecker, who was the lawyer who cross-examined Oliver North in the Iran-Contra affair, said, Antwi, I got you. This is totally unjust. I'm going to represent you pro bono. Right? It's a really powerful story. But even with John Kecker, and I'm going to fast forward through this part of it, the university, for some reason, thought I was going to sue them. So they resisted. They banned me from campus. And what it took was another wealthy family to come in and say, we will pay all of your legal bills and battle them, right, for as long as you need for them to back down and finally let me back on campus to do my job. Right? That is how crazy the system is. And I had all kinds of social and cultural capital. What would it be like? What is it like for the people who don't have my kind of social and cultural capital, who don't have a degree from Berkeley, from Stanford, a PhD from the University of Pennsylvania. What is happening to them? Frightening. Frightening what our system is doing. So the minute that I got out of jail, I wrote a grant, a STEM grant, science, technology, engineering, and math, for formerly incarcerated people. Right? I got a $500,000 grant. We won the award to build college and career pathways for formerly incarcerated people in the STEM innovation economy. And for that, you should give them a hand. At the same time, a few years later, Henry Louis Gates at Harvard got arrested. And if you all remember this, President Obama had to intervene. And I went from being the poster boy for professors who had been incarcerated to the expert, right, on the Jim Lear NewsHour, right, about analyzing racial profiling in America, right? And part of what I want to share with all of you, because we only have this conversation and conversations like this, which is why I'm so grateful that you all took your time on this evening to come out and listen to me and to break bread with me. It's really, you all should be commended. But I want to stress how race matters, right? Race matters in the structural shape of our cities and schools, in our personal experience, in our health and well-being. Health is always there, coloring our psychology, our physiology, our perceptions of place, and our access to institutional resources and privileges. And race subsumes social class. And I want to be clear about this because people start to want to talk about being colorblind, and we do not want to be colorblind. I want you to see that I am a 6'3", whatever pound, black male. I love being black. I'm one of these people who always wished I was darker. That was just me. You know, I had a dark-skinned father, and I was like, hey, that's cool. You know, I'm cool with that, right? But we should all see each other and value each other's culture for whatever we are, whatever we look like, whoever we are. But I swear, if President Obama, when he leaves office in New York City, he may not be able to catch a cab. Straight up. Race subsumes social class, right? There's also racism in the heart of liberalism. I mean, this happened in the Bay Area, one of the most liberal parts of the country. And we know what's going on here in Austin, so I know y'all can relate to that. We racially profile whole communities, and gentrification is often just another word for ethnic cleansing. When I was incarcerated, what we said to each other is, this could have happened to any of us, and every day it happens to many of us. And since that time, it was 2005. Look at what's happened. I mean, it actually makes me think I should have just started to list Oscar Grant and Eric Garner and Laquan, the young man who was just killed in Chicago. Like, the list goes on and on and on. It's gotten, I don't even want to say it's gotten worse, it's gotten more press, right? It's been happening, but it's gotten more press. And I think it's up to us in this room, the activists, the organizers, the city folks, the designers, the architects, the planners, the private developers, to do something about it, to stay connected and to stay engaged, right? And we can talk about, well, what can we do? So what can be done? Well, what if we build a movement, right? At the intersection of social justice and ecology movements, of entrepreneurship and activism, of interchange and social change, what if we didn't just have hybrid cars? What if we had a hybrid social movement? And I really want to think about this hybrid social movement. We've seen the power of social media and the power of technology before. We saw it in Egypt. We saw the ability of social media and mobile platforms to mobilize people, to disseminate news and information, and to disrupt entire institutions. And I started to think really critically about how can we use technology for movement building right here in the United States. And the first thing we need to do is recognize that our democracy has been hacked by special interest groups and big money, right? And so we need to reclaim our democracy. And in order to reclaim our democracy, technology is one of the ways, through blogs, through tweets, through posts, that we can begin to have everyday people's voices heard. Because right now, what we're seeing is that TV and television is controlled by big money and special interests. So we're never going to be able to get our stories out in that way. So we have to have some alternative means to tell our own story. Kind of like when we had the printing press come out. It revolutionized our ability to share and disseminate information. And it was a way, just as technology can be, to put the power back in the hands of everyday people. So can this 2.0 democracy that I'm talking about help make Austin immune from the disease of gentrification? How many of you believe that that's possible? 0, 1. I had one earlier too. Hopeless people. Hopeless people. You don't think that your own city could become immune to gentrification? Well, I do believe it. I think it's possible. And I think to make a neighborhood immune from gentrification, one of the vaccines to this disease is permanently affordable housing. And let me give you 3 examples. We have one example of, the Bay Area where we're coming from is very much like Austin. It's an eco-innovation economy that has seen an explosion of wealth. And as a result, massive income inequality. And in the heart of San Francisco, literally in the heart of downtown, is this district called the Tenderloin, that some of you may have heard of. The Tenderloin is a district that is high poverty, lots of drugs, and also surrounded by massive affluence. I mean, the kind of affluence where Twitter is right there on the edge of the Tenderloin, where Uber main headquarters is right there, okay? And everyday people like you and I, Tenderloin activists, worked with the government and nonprofit partners. Like Poder, you have great organizations here. Suzanne is here in this room. People should be partnering with organizations like that. And what they were able to do was obtain control over a significant amount of real estate in the Tenderloin, to such an extent where nonprofits and government entities control and own 25% of the land. Why is that important? Because we're talking about how can we become immune to gentrification. So when the pressures of gentrification are pushing in on the Tenderloin, community control of the land is key. And so when high-end luxury apartments want to come in, or condos to the neighborhood, when high-end luxury coffee shops and high-end luxury donut shops, all the things the community does not need and never ask for, when those come in, the everyday people like you and I are not displaced. So that's one example that we can learn from. Another example, and a proven model, is what happened in Boston with the Dudley Street Initiative. City planners, just like in the city of Austin and many cities around the United States, wanted to build high-end luxury condos and hotels. But the community, everyday people just like you and I, said, we don't want that. And then something really unique happened. The community was able to use eminent domain from the city to take 60 acres of land from a private developer and develop it for the community under a community land trust. And so by using this community land trust, they were able to protect the land from the real estate market and the private marketization that happens in real estate. At the same time, the city had 2,600 vacant lots. And so the Dudley Street Initiative was able to successfully convince the city to donate those vacant lots to them, to work in partnership with universities, to work in partnership with a national nonprofit called the Trust for Public Land, who was able to raise the capital, and they were able to start urban farms. And so they were able to both not only create affordable housing, 225 units, but also feed the community and transform a food desert into at least a food swamp. I wouldn't call it a food oasis yet, right? And speaking of transforming a food desert, another example, remember we're talking here about could we become immune? Can we inoculate ourselves from the disease of gentrification? And there's only 2 believers of us in this room so far, but after, I'm hoping to convince many of you that it is possible. In Greensboro, North Carolina, the African American community had been saying for 20 years, we need a grocery store. We need a grocery store. Just like East Austin has been saying, and other places, we need a grocery store. We need a grocery store. We need a grocery store. Anybody there? Nobody's listening. So finally, not you all, now I'm talking about the city and the powers that be, right? Finally, the community said, forget it. We'll start our own grocery store. I love this idea. This is brilliant, right? So the Renaissance Community Co-op decided, hey, we're going to start our own grocery store. The way we're going to do it is really simple. We're going to sell memberships for $100. So every person in our community feels like they own a piece of the grocery store. And they were able to raise over $1 million on their own. And then something really transformative happened, where the Self-Help Venture Fund, which looks at commercial real estate and tries to fit the goals of economic self-sufficiency with economic stabilization in low-income communities, said, we want to help. And so we will help buy the actual land, and then we'll lease you the land, right? And I'm wondering, who in the Austin community is that self-help venture fund, right? We need to be thinking about creating those things for our communities right here, right? And this was another way in which they were able to stave off gentrification. And I would argue, why aren't we looking at our churches, our black churches, our white churches, our Latino churches, our school districts, our cities? All of these institutions own so much land. There are so many vacant lots that we could be turning into these kinds of opportunities that could help us become more immune to the impacts of gentrification. So, if we want to become immune to gentrification, and I'm just going to quickly read through these, this is your 13-point plan. 1, we need to aggressively build affordable housing for the missing middle, right? And I'm talking about in-law units, what they call ADUs, right? And we need to be doing that right here in Austin. 2, we need to reduce or freeze property taxes for long-term residents. Right now, or defer them, right? Right now you can defer property taxes, but it's at 8%, right? We need to reduce that to 2%. And this can go to the state legislature right now. We need to tweak the code so that the people who can defer are not just above 65. They need to see that many of us below 65 need to be able to defer our taxes. 3, donate the land, and I talked about converting it to affordable housing or gardens. 4, baseline protections for vulnerable residents. 5, smaller is bigger. We need to restrict large-scale luxury developments in low-income communities and communities of color. I am not saying don't build up. We can still build duplexes, brownstones. We can have ADUs, but zoning just for luxury apartments that are bringing no value to our communities is setting us back. It's not setting us forward. 7, create stabilization vouchers to help folks stay when gentrification happens. 8, enforce fair housing rules and rent control. A lot of this, the rules are already on the books, right? And San Francisco is a great example. Okay, the average rent in San Francisco is $3,000 a month. That means you have to be making $120,000 to rent, not own, to rent in San Francisco. Now, I know all of you are cool with that. You all make that. You're all good. But for those other people, we're struggling, right, to make those ends meet. And so what's really interesting about San Francisco is that San Francisco has led the way in terms of rent control nationally. So even with the city that's led the way in rent control, we're seeing skyrocketing rents. Why? Because of loopholes. Because when a person moves, you don't have to be under rent control anymore. And there's all sorts of other kinds of loopholes. So there's 172 units that are under rent control out of 350,000. But because of the loopholes, people are able to inflate the rent. So we have to enforce rent control. We need to look at non-market-based approaches to housing and community development, like worker co-ops and housing co-ops. We need to provide a living wage, not just to city employees, but to everybody in the city. And people said, well, that's against state law. We can't do that. That's against state law, right? And it's like, well, it was against state law for Sweet to go to law school here, right? It was against state law at a time for me to be up here speaking to you. Forget about state law, right? That's what you organize for, right? You organize for and you find innovative ways around state law. And if you remember the $110 billion that I spoke of, right? Texas likes money. Legislature likes money. The economy needs the pump priming, right? So when you're talking about giving everyone a living wage, you're talking about putting more money into the economy for small businesses, for entrepreneurs, for innovators, right? And that's a good thing. Somebody's going to be able to figure that out, and I'm hoping it's somebody in this room. And finally, we need equity impact across all measures and metrics, and we need participatory planning so that everyday people can be the ones to transform the social and material conditions in their communities. Now, how do you pay for this? And I'm almost done. Give me 10 more minutes of your time. One, you invest in infrastructure. And so in Minneapolis, half of the commercial tax revenue coming from major corporations has been redistributed to the poorest areas in the community. This is regional equity. So when people are like, well, how could you pay for it? This is a great example of how you could pay for this, right? And so everyone has access to high-quality green and civic infrastructure in the city of Minneapolis. I'm talking about parks and playgrounds and schools. And Minneapolis has the highest retention of Fortune 500 companies, and it's very much like Austin in terms of being surrounded by a number of really high-quality schools. But people don't want to leave Minneapolis because you could live in East Austin or Southeast Austin, and you have access to great stuff, right? Your community is just as cool or near as if you live somewhere else, right? So that's a really important way. And what about everyday people? In Democracy 2.0, if walkability is the secret sauce for complete communities, are we going to build walkable communities for everyone? And we have this woman, and drawing on the work of Morgan Dixon and the women's liberation and the civil rights movement, she started an organization called Girl Trek. And she reminds us that walking is the real wonder drug for disconnected communities too. And that we need to be building walkable communities for all people. And you all can hear it from Morgan in her own words. Are you serious? Are you serious? Good grief. Oh my gosh. Now we're double serious. All right, anyway, the reason I'm saying are you serious is because we tested this. This happened this afternoon. I was all ready and excited because this afternoon's crowd couldn't see this particular piece. I was like, but the night crowd's going to get to see it. And I was hyped about it. And now we're like in massive technology place. There's Morgan. There's Morgan talking. All right, let's keep going. Okay. Anyway, what Morgan is basically saying is she's got 15,000 women out there walking every day, walking for their health. Doesn't matter their size, their weight, they're walking in the spirit of all of these other women, Harriet Tubman and women who have come before her. And to me, the real missing link, and I think what Morgan is really talking about in the conversation, is what does people-powered placemaking look like from the ground up? And part of what people-powered placemaking looks like is we need real-time, two-way communication with everyday people so that they can participate in the design solutions in their own community. And my own nonprofit, ISEED, which stands for the Institute for Sustainable Economic, Educational, and Environmental Design, has been building these kinds of platforms for communities to innovate, cities to become smarter, and communities to collaborate. And one of the tools and the platforms that I wanted to share with you all that might interest you is a platform called Streetwise, which is a mobile mapping and SMS platform that gives real-time feedback about how people are experiencing cities and services. And why is this important? Because most of the kinds of platforms that you all have right now give you your proximity to something. So they might tell you, GIS mapping might tell you your proximity to a park. But what really matters is your experience in that park, right? Is that the park where the drugs are sold? Is it safe enough to bring my children to the park? Do the swing sets work at the park? And so what we've done is created a platform that gives you both proximal data and information from people as well as experiential data. And it answers questions like, how walkable is my neighborhood? And for, as an example, all the women in the room will tell you walkability is really important. Like, we want to know, what are the places where women are sexually harassed? Where are the dark streets? Where are the light streets, right? Walkability is not the same from block to block. And right now, we have no way of really figuring out that kind of information. How well is my neighborhood served by public transit? It's the same thing. Right now, we have apps that can tell us the train is coming, or you live near the train, but it's really about, is the train on time? What's your experience like on the train? Is it crowded? Is it not? Right? That experiential data. Same thing goes with where can I buy affordable, healthy food? Where can I go if there's an emergency? There's official knowledge of where to go when there's an emergency, then there's local knowledge, right? And local knowledge could be, I might go to the church, which is also the education center, which is also the healthcare center, right? And that kind of knowledge now with Streetwise you'll be able to see. The other thing that Streetwise does is it puts the power back in the hands of everyday people. This is a public data set very similarly to East Austin from the Department of Public Health that says how many how many grocery stores are supposedly in East Oakland. And you can see East Oakland, in their minds, supposedly looks a lot like East Austin. It's a food oasis. Not. But when you use Streetwise, what you find is you ground truth that information. And you find that those actually, in fact, were not grocery stores. They're actually liquor stores, right? And so instead of having a food desert, we have a food oasis. And the other thing that we do is you can embed any kind of media, Twitter, Vine, Facebook, videos. And this is really important when you're trying to reach out to low literacy populations and just everyday people. And so if this video works, you're going to hear from a young woman narrating the liquor store in her community. And this video does not work either. I'm bummed out. Okay. So we've used the platform in a number of different places. In San Diego, we used Streetwise, and what we found was arsenic in the drinking water. And so the policy win was safer drinking water for San Diego. In Merced, we used Streetwise, and we identified a spatial mismatch between where the poor folks live and where the jobs are. And the policy win was to argue for better bus stops that are more closely located to where poor folks are living. And we gave you the example of transforming a food desert to a food oasis in East Oakland. And the secret to our success has really been our ability to try. And what I'm talking about is failing forward, right? We know that, Michael Jordan, basketball player, for those of you who don't know, missed 9,000 shots in his career, right? But no one remembers how many shots Michael Jordan missed. What they remember is he's the best player ever, right? Maria Gonzalez watched many people dying of malaria. And she tried and tried and tried, and she failed and failed and failed, until finally she created the anti-parasitic malaria drug that has now been used all over the world. Thomas Edison conducted 1,000 failed experiments. Did you all know that? Some people are like, yeah, I knew. I knew it was 1,000 precisely. I didn't know that either, but I did learn that his 1,001st was the light bulb, right? And that's what he's remembered for, not the 1,000 failed experiments that came before that. My point is, all of us suck at something. All of us fail, all of us will be embarrassed, but the real thing is we have to try and try. And if we want a new urbanism to reach its full potential, if we want this democracy 2.0 to reach its full potential, it's important to start somewhere and get back up and keep going. And so, in closing, I'd like for all of you to join us and really help us help communities use the power of local knowledge to protect our nation's most vulnerable populations. Help us promote policies and practices that really nurture development without displacement. Help us create self-determination and bolder public agencies and public-private partnerships. Help us build communities that are immune from gentrification, create new, innovative models of affordable housing, empower communities to identify their own needs, and design alternative models of community development that work for all of us so people do not have to leave their communities in order to live, learn, work, and thrive. And if you enjoyed this message, I invite all of you to check out my TEDx talk called Innovation Out of Poverty. TED, too, has a really nasty habit, actually, of not posting as many women and people of color on their homepage. And so if you like this talk and you want to watch this one and you watch that one and you believe in the message, the way to get this talk out is I invite you to share it with at least one other person and ask that person to share it with at least one other person, and you know how the rest goes, right? Because the only way that the word is going to get out is if we use people power, and that is what we are all about. This is my email address. This is ECTA's email address. Imagine Austin, we are grateful for having us. Thank you very much. Yeah, and you can take questions too. All right, so we have a few moments for Q&A. Oh, we already have Q&A?
And then we'll take the microphones around.
Then we'll take the microphone. We only have one mic? What is the one most important thing a developer or a construction company can do to fight gentrification? I think having really robust community benefits. I think making sure that your development is 40%, right? Between 30 and 50% MFI, right? 40% affordable are some of the initial steps that a developer could do to really resist gentrification. And as I said, to resist the temptation of putting high rises in low-income communities and communities of color. Instead, think of mixed use and mixed income. And small is big. And I think if developers followed that, we would have complete communities that work for all folks, right, instead of just the 1% and the elite folks. So whoever asked this question, thank you for the question. Minority communities are underrepresented in voting. Why and how to address it? I don't use the term minority because people of color are about to be, and in California we already are, the majority. So I think that that's interesting. And people should be thinking about that and the implications of that. But in terms of underrepresented in voting, I think we, people of color, will vote more when we feel like, and again, now I can't speak for all people of color, but I'm positioned here as the expert, so I'm going to do my best. We feel like we're getting something back, right? That the system actually cares about what we have to say and why we have to say it. And I think you would see a much higher voter turnout, and you actually did, in fact, see a higher voter turnout when President Obama, right, was even up for election, and we saw many people thinking that they shared similar values, right, and that there was a way where somebody might actually care about their lived experience and do something about their lived experience. And so I think through a combination of outreach and engagement with our most vulnerable populations, which are seniors and also elderly people and also abled folks, and I think the right kind of messaging to communities will really start to make people feel like they're cared about, and more folks would participate in the political system. And honestly, we built the Streetwise platform as a mechanism to get people more civically engaged, right? But first we wanted to show you can do something about transforming the social and material conditions in your own community. And I think once you start doing that and you start having success and some wins, that's easily can translate. And I think the 10-1 plan, right, now that people have a representative in their community, I think the nonprofits, the organizers, the activists, because Streetwise is really a digital organizing platform. It's really about 21st century stakeholder engagement. It can be combined with traditional ways of organizing and new ways, and it collects that data. And guess what? It holds people accountable in ways that they've never been held accountable before, because it democratizes data and it democratizes decision making simultaneously. And I think as those things continue to happen, people are going to stay more and want to be more civically engaged. So thank you for that question.
There's 3 of them, yeah.
3 of them. You guys are having fun, huh? I want to give people an opportunity to leave if you want to. No one wants to go yet. People are like, I'm not leaving, ever. Okay. I'm here. Okay. You know, I'm going to do something. I'm going to take out my glasses so that I do not blame this person. Is it your handwriting? I'm like, wait a minute, what is that word, man? I generally don't wear these, but I'm like, okay, look, I really want to be able to see this. Professor, woo! All right. I still have no idea what you're saying. No, okay. What? No. What can the city of Austin and everyday people, activists, do to eliminate Austin's eco-apartheid? I.e., what are some policies and cultural practices you recommend specifically to Austin? I like the question. I mean, I think, didn't the whole slide on making Austin immune to gentrification cover that? Or
I wrote that before that.
You wrote that before that. Okay, well, is that a sufficient answer?
Yeah, so based off what you learned today, like I didn't get to attend the conference today with like Colbert, and I'm a part of the Environmental Justice Committee of the Sierra Club, and that's one of the big things we've been talking about. So I'm just curious, based off your experience and what you've learned today from Austin activists, you know,
What can they do?
Yeah.
Okay.
And,
All right, Susanna, maybe you want to take it. You want to take this one? So what can the city of Austin and everyday people, activists, do to eliminate Austin's eco-apartheid? Introduce yourself and who you are and why I'm here.
I'm Susanna Almanza with Poder, and actually we make several recommendations. You know, the city owns over 1,000 properties, and so what we're saying is that they can either donate to nonprofit housing development or donate as a partnership to nonprofit and developers to build affordable housing. That could happen. The other thing, it could stop doing it blanket zoning in East Austin, where they are commercializing mixed use and allowing condos and townhomes and so forth to come in our communities, and stop using federal funds for affordable housing at 80% medium income for ownership and at 60% rental, when we know that our communities live from 0 to 30% median family income. So I think that there's a lot of policies that the city can do and should do, and these are things that we have already recommended to City Council dating back to 2002, where we did the gentrification report. So I think that those are a lot of things that the city can do. It talks about affordability, it talks about gentrification, but it doesn't walk and it doesn't act. And so I think as activists, we got to push those buttons and we got to work together, and we've got to put the pressure on the city and the county to do these things. And then we also got to look at the equity issue. You know, we're getting a lot of bike lanes, and I'm not against people using bicyclists, but we have people generations waiting for sidewalks. And when we talk about walkability and accessibility, we come from a family culture, and so how do we make sure that grandma and our aunts and our children can get to that place they need to get? So I think there's a lot of issues we need to work on, and the whole issue of the living wage. You know, we can tell the city, when you hire those lobbyists, you need to work to make sure that the city gets the authority to set the living wage for the whole city, not just for city employees. Those are some of them.
What can people here do to support your organization? Now, I'm giving you a minute to get this one out.
Well, that is a poverty organization, and I want to thank some of the environmental groups yesterday for doing a house party to help raise funds for Poder so that we can continue our work. But the resource issue is a big issue. But I think that a lot of the environmental groups too, because the mainstream environmental groups could also help by making sure and hire someone and place them with Poder, so that they're covering that staff person at Poder, but also working with us on those issues, because East Austin can't do it by itself. It's got to be all of Austin working together.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for that question. All right, affordable housing solutions like community land trusts are great, but often don't make a dent because they aren't large enough in scale to meet the level of need. And these properties aren't, i.e. don't seem to be attractive to the local government because they don't yield much in prosperity, say taxes. How do you convince city leaders to get on board when high-end condos seem more profitable or fit into their vision of Austin as a technopolis creative city? That's a good question. I think, I think Philadelphia is trying to scale the idea of a community land trust into a community bank. And that means that you could actually have much more land and much more affordable housing at scale. So I think that's number one. I think number two, that there's much more to be gained than just, the city too often is thinking about acting like a business, and they care about the bottom line, okay? Like a business would, money. But the city is more than just a business, right? So the city has to worry about social capital and cultural capital and human capital and community capacity building and all these other things. And so I think that it's not in the city's best interest to just build luxury high-rise condos when they are systematically neglecting the health and well-being of other neighborhoods. And the reason I gave the Minneapolis example is because why aren't we taxing this technopolis? Who's the person who asked this question? You guys get to hide from me. There, see? Why aren't we taxing these big businesses and spreading out the commercial tax revenue to the poorest areas in the city? Okay, and so I love that it's in the realm of politics, because in the realm, yeah, right, no, that's, yeah, don't hate the messenger. I ain't hating on you. You're telling me the reality of what it is, and I'm saying, exactly, that's why I gave an example. And there was a time where me speaking to you was not allowed in the state of Texas. That's why I always talk about movement building, right? So the fact that it's in the realm of politics means that it's up for debate, that we can organize, that we can transform it, that we can change it. So my job has been to show you all that it's possible and a vision of where it's happening. To make this more than a one and done thing is how can we work together, both using the Streetwise platform and through all the amazing work that you're doing to organize and make some of these visions, this imagining Austin and reimagining Austin real and a reality. Right? So that's what I hope to do with all of you. So thank you for your question. You don't look satisfied, but I'm fine with that. I am satisfied. So with that answer, but I can always learn. So these examples of staving off gentrification seem to be emerging at the grassroots. What's the role of the city or of outsiders in helping that happen? I think public agencies have to take a leadership role. That's why I put up on the end, we need bigger, bolder public agencies. I tried to address up front that public agencies, along with private developers in the private sector, helped create gentrification. And that means public agencies, along with the private sector, can also be the people to reverse gentrification. If we created it, we can get rid of it. Right? So I think that the public sector, when I talked about federally subsidized, federally underwritten, federally guaranteed FHA and VHA loans, I talked about the federal level. But the reality is that the state level, the county level, and the local level were complicit. We're equally as complicit in creating the gentrified communities and racist land use laws. And that means the federal, the local, the state, the county need to reverse those things. And if they don't, this is where the political piece comes out. And why I like the 10-1. Get rid of them. The organizing has to happen. Vote them out. Right? So I think that the city government has to play a leadership role in transforming gentrification. But I also believe with Dr. King, which is why we can't wait. I don't want to sit around waiting for anybody. Federal, state, local, don't matter. I want communities who are full of self-determination, right, and who do their best in spite of, without any help if we have to. I'm not saying that that's the way we should go. We need help, but I'm saying we've got to be prepared to do that, right? Do you think subsidized affordable housing puts pressure on the missing middle housing? No, I don't. I think that they can both coexist. I think subsidized affordable housing is good and important, and I think making sure that the missing middle is doing well is equally as important, and they can both coexist. How did you explain what happened at the university to your children? I didn't have to explain. They knew what happened, right? They were a part of it. We were all traumatized. So it wasn't like, hey, did you know that your dad just disappeared? It was like, the cops are here, they are tripping out, and this is going to be okay. And my great friend is here who's going to take you home, and we're going to work all this out, and we're going to make this right. And I love you guys, and I'll see you. It was just keeping it real with my children and being upfront about racism, right? And we have to do that with people of color, women, folks who come from backgrounds where we don't always have all the privilege, have to be real, with our children, with our loved ones all the time. So that was another opportunity. You know what? I think we should end with that question because I'm getting from the back like 30 seconds. So thank you, Austin, for having us. We're grateful.